We toured the ruins of the world's most ancient and most advanced civilization. Seeing such brilliant town planning in that distant antiquity leaves the human mind astonished. At the very time when the ancient Egyptians were busy venerating their pharaohs. Here they had solid, brick-built houses, double-story as well, attached and public bathrooms. Modern jacuzzi-style waterproof pools. Roads, a sewerage system, and new technologies taking shape. But the question is, how was all this happening in this corner of the world? We're talking about none other than Mohenjo Daro, the Indus Valley Civilization's advanced city that has kept experts entangled in riddles to this day. In that era, what hidden link did the Indus civilization have with ancient Egypt? 4,000 kilometers away. And above all, despite achieving so much, where did these people ultimately go? Welcome back to the videos of Jum TV, dear viewers. The story begins in December 1922. When Indian archaeologist R.D. Banerjee set out to hunt along the banks of the Indus River in western India. He spotted a stunning red-spotted deer. He urged his horse to give chase. But the deer slipped into a nearby forest and vanished. Pursuing it left Banerjee exhausted, so he decided to rest beneath a tree. At that moment, his foot struck a sharp, blade-like object. At first glance it looked like an ordinary stone. But on closer inspection it turned out to be a flint scraper used in the Bronze Age, roughly 4,500 years ago, an implement for skinning animals or cutting various materials. Finding a flint scraper in such dense woodland astonished Banerjee. So he began investigating the spot. Just then a local man arrived on an ox cart and started loading items from a part of the forest onto his cart. Banerjee noticed they were ready-made fired bricks that the man was taking home to use. We toured the ruins of the world's most ancient and most advanced civilization. Seeing such brilliant town planning in that distant antiquity leaves the human mind astonished. At the very time when the ancient Egyptians were busy venerating their pharaohs. Here they had solid, brick-built houses, double-story as well, attached and public bathrooms. Modern jacuzzi-style waterproof pools. Roads, a sewerage system, and new technologies taking shape. But the question is, how was all this happening in this corner of the world? We're talking about none other than Mohenjo Daro, the Indus Valley Civilization's advanced city that has kept experts entangled in riddles to this day. In that era, what hidden link did the Indus civilization have with ancient Egypt? 4,000 kilometers away. And above all, despite achieving so much, where did these people ultimately go? Welcome back to the videos of Jum TV, dear viewers. The story begins in December 1922. When Indian archaeologist R.D. Banerjee set out to hunt along the banks of the Indus River in western India. He spotted a stunning red-spotted deer. He urged his horse to give chase. But the deer slipped into a nearby forest and vanished. Pursuing it left Banerjee exhausted, so he decided to rest beneath a tree. At that moment, his foot struck a sharp, blade-like object. At first glance it looked like an ordinary stone. But on closer inspection it turned out to be a flint scraper used in the Bronze Age, roughly 4,500 years ago, an implement for skinning animals or cutting various materials. Finding a flint scraper in such dense woodland astonished Banerjee. So he began investigating the spot. Just then a local man arrived on an ox cart and started loading items from a part of the forest onto his cart. Banerjee noticed they were ready-made fired bricks that the man was taking home to use. Being highly experienced in archaeology, Banerjee realized that beneath this forest there must be a buried ancient settlement. He set up camp with his team right there, hired some locals, and continued digging for the next 4 months. What Banerjee uncovered in those 4 months was enough to create a stir in the world of archaeology. From beneath the forest emerged seals engraved with unfamiliar characters and images of animals. He sent impressions of these seals to his senior, Sir John Marshall, then Director General of the Archaeological Survey of India. Although these seals had been unearthed after thousands of years, Sir John Marshall had seen similar impressions before, indeed. 2 years prior to Mohenjo Daro and 600 kilometers to the north at Harappa. Indian archaeologist Daya Ram Sani had found nearly identical seals. These clues were sufficient to show that Mohenjo Daro and Harappa were two distinct cities, yet parts of the same civilization. Initially it was labeled the Harappan civilization. But as more small and large sites were discovered, most along the Indus, the name Indus Valley Civilization gained currency. Even so, the civilization was not confined to the Indus Valley alone. Its traces extend from the Makran coast of Balochistan to eastern Afghanistan, the Yamuna River, and from Gujarat to northern Pakistan. In total, more than 1,400 settlements of the Indus civilization have been identified across this vast region. Some experts argue the number reaches 3,771. In other words, the civilization stretched roughly 1,600 kilometers east to west and 1,100 kilometers north to south. Compared to the areas of ancient Egypt and Mesopotamia, the Indus civilization spanned a territory larger than those two combined. By one estimate, some 5 million people lived across this cultural sphere. Mohenjo Daro was not only the largest city of the Indus Valley but also ranks among the earliest purpose-built and sophisticated urban centers in world history. The name Mohenjo Daro comes from the local Sindhi language, Daro meaning mound or tell. Excavations have continued here, but out of 633 acres, only about 10% has actually been dug. Even that limited area has yielded enough to present a clear picture of the people's mindset and way of life. 5,000 years ago they constructed a planned city. Roads and lanes were laid out so that the primary avenues ran exactly north-south, and the cross streets intersected at true right angles. Mohenjo Daro was divided into sectors. A raised upper city called the citadel, separate from the lower town, where the important structures stood, such as administrative buildings and granaries. The granaries had ventilators for airflow and platforms for loading and unloading, an indicator of a government attentive to public welfare. In times of flood or hardship, stored grain could be distributed among the people. Then comes the Great Bath, a pool 2.5 meters deep, with stairways on both sides for descent. Note that the Great Bath of Mohenjo Daro is the earliest of its kind known in the world. Measuring about 12 meters long by 7 meters wide, it could hold roughly 2,100 liters of water. How did walls 5,000 years old bear that much weight? Excavations revealed the walls were made watertight with gypsum and bitumen, materials still used for waterproofing today. Columns around the Great Bath suggest the entire pool may once have been covered by a large roof, much like modern indoor pools. A substantial well stood nearby to fill it, and a drain opening in the pool's floor led into a larger channel that carried water out of the city toward the river. The bath's exact function remains uncertain, but many scholars believe it served religious or ritual activities. There are more structures atop the citadel, but one stands out from the rest: its excavation remains incomplete. This enigmatic building covers about 4,800 square feet and contains 20 large pillars. Most likely it was a grand assembly hall for officials to gather, or perhaps a ceremonial hall for events. One of the most striking features of Mohenjo Daro is that virtually every structure, indeed the entire city, was raised on elevated platforms. This is typically done to protect buildings from rainwater and floods. Even today in this part of Sindh, heavy rains every other year often inundate entire villages. This means it wasn't accidental. 5 millennia ago, fully aware of flooding, they engineered their whole city on high platforms as a deliberate plan. And the reason wasn't only rainfall. The people of Mohenjo Daro had devised a system unseen anywhere else at the time: a superb citywide drainage and sewage network. Every building, down to the smallest home, connected into it. At regular intervals there were manholes so blockages could be cleared. The channels were covered with limestone slabs, not just to prevent accidents, but because limestone tends to absorb odors. From this you can gauge how serious they were about cleanliness. Neither ancient Egypt nor Mesopotamia possessed such a system then, and even today. Many rural areas in the subcontinent lack comparable sewerage. In just that 10% excavation area, some 700 wells were found. Although the Indus itself once flowed right beside the city, wells still appear everywhere, large public wells and smaller ones in many homes. Away from the citadel, the lower town consisted mainly of residences, markets, and an industrial zone. Especially to the east of the citadel, where merchants and wealthier folk lived. Here you also find double-story houses with broad staircases rising from verandas to the upper floors. In some homes, wells were raised as much as 10 feet to serve those living upstairs. In the markets, one shop contained a large tandoor-like oven for baking bread. A broad window opposite suggests people queued there waiting their turn. Another shop had a takeaway-style service window, reminiscent of modern fast food counters. In an elite neighborhood, one house was built with an inner wall of sun-dried mud and an outer face of fired brick, clearly to keep the interior cool. The thoroughness of their planning is also clear from the fact that a principal boulevard through the lower town was laid absolutely straight. While filming this very area, a 5,000-year-old artifact turned up in a wall, an earthen conical piece. It looks a bit like a rifle bullet, but it was in fact a device for telling time by the sun's shadow. You'd stand it upright in sunlight and read the time from the cone's shadow. Some thought he looked like a priest in contemplation. Others saw a king, so the hybrid label priest-king stuck. Its lower part is still missing. The other famed artifact is the dancing girl, whose pose suggests movement. After excavation, both sculptures spent years at the ASI headquarters in New Delhi. In 1970, Pakistan's President Zulfikar Ali Bhutto requested their return from Indian Prime Minister Indira Gandhi. She reportedly said, "We can't give the dancing girl, but you may take this, Maulvi Sahib." Since then, a replica sits in the Karachi Museum, while the original is preserved safely out of public view. The people of the Indus were remarkably skilled. They didn't just adopt technology, they innovated. Agriculture was their principal income source. Thanks to the Indus River's flow, the soil was fertile. Wheat, barley, banana, melon, and peas were cultivated. But their standout achievement was cotton. At a time when neither Egypt nor Mesopotamia had even conceived it. Cotton production at Mohenjo Daro dates to around 2000 BCE, about 4,000 years ago, roughly 7,000 years before today if counting older evidence cited, an actual textile. Remnants were found adhering to a silver vase and lids of copper vessels. Their craftsmanship shows in their bricks too, uniform, standardized sizes. First sun-dried, then kiln-fired. But where did they get enough fuel to fire so many bricks? Today the landscape looks barren. But in earlier times this region was forested. And those forests supplied the wood they needed. Other artifacts bear witness to their ingenuity: a bronze mirror, a wooden comb, jewelry of clay and bronze, a copper axe, fishhooks, sewing needles, coal containers, grinding stones for spices, painted pottery, bathtubs, a variety of children's toys, balls and little carts, seals for stamping, and above all, calibrated weights. Tests show they weighed goods for trade. The smallest weight comes out today to approximately 0.856 grams. And a very common unit is 13.7 grams. Multiply the smallest by 16 and you get 13.7 exactly. This standard recurs across the entire civilization wherever such weights are found. It's clear their economy and commerce were well organized. So did they trade only within their borders, or did they have connections abroad? The veil lifted when John Marshall decided to publish finds from Harappa and Mohenjo Daro in a London newspaper. On September 20, 1924, an article appeared in the Illustrated London News, introducing the world at large to this civilization. After reading it and viewing the artifacts, An archaeologist from Iraq contacted Marshall, noting that the very seals he'd published had parallels from Mesopotamian sites. The only reasonable conclusion: the Indus Valley had trading ties with Mesopotamia, some 2,200 kilometers away, and Mesopotamia, in turn, connected with Egypt. A rare carnelian bead from the Indus has even been found in Egypt. Experts argue it likely traveled first from the Indus to Mesopotamia, and then to Egypt. It's fair to say Indus craft was recognized internationally for that era. These are the sorts of items exported from the Indus to Mesopotamia and Egypt. 3,000 to 5,000 years ago, standardized weights, finely carved stones, bracelets, beads, and seals. If they had foreign contacts, by what name were the Indus people known? A clue appears in a fascinating, authentic account, cuneiform tablets of the Akkadian king Sargon record that he dispatched his ships to Dilmun, Magan, and Meluhha, instructing his men to bring back precious goods. Dilmun referred to the Persian Gulf region, modern Bahrain. Magan to Oman/Makran, and from Meluhha they procured timber, carnelian, and ivory. It's no coincidence that even today these three are native to the Indian subcontinent, India/Pakistan. Timber is abundant. Carnelian is sourced in Gujarat. And Asia hosts a major population of elephants. There were two routes to Mesopotamia: an overland corridor from the Indus through Afghanistan and Iran to Iraq, and a maritime route, floating goods down the Indus to the sea and onward to the Persian Gulf. 5,000 years ago, sea level was lower and the Gulf only a few meters deep, much of it formerly land. Where Dubai's eastern coast lies today, Mesopotamian territory began in antiquity. Thus the distance from the Indus Delta to Iraq, now about 2,000 kilometers, may then have been roughly half. We've learned a great deal about Mohenjo Daro and the Indus civilization. Yet some mysteries endure, chief among them their language and script, known as the Indus script. Just as English has 26 letters, Hindi 46, and Urdu 39, each with distinct sounds, the Indus script has, so far, about 419 signs catalogued. Despite many attempts, it remains undeciphered. We do know it was written right to left, inferred from tablets where space ran short on the left, and the scribe shrank the signs to fit. Perhaps its complexity was intentional, designed to keep it esoteric. And now something present at Mohenjo Daro that the Indus themselves didn't build, a Buddhist stupa. Tradition holds it was constructed roughly 2,000 years after Mohenjo Daro's decline. In the era of the Kushan rulers, a typical stupa houses a relic pot containing the Buddha's ashes. After the Buddha's passing, disputes arose among his followers. The resolution was to cremate the body and distribute the ashes to various places. Wherever they found a high mound, they erected a dome, enshrined the ashes, built surrounding chambers, and began worship there. But at Mohenjo Daro, before official discovery, treasure hunters broke into the stupa. Fragments of it were recovered during the 1925 excavations. So where did such an advanced civilization go? Note that only a few dozen skeletons have been found at Mohenjo Daro, meaning the city didn't become ruins overnight. Out of 633 acres, only 10% has been excavated, 90% still lies buried. Estimates suggest 50,000 to 100,000 people lived there. If a sudden invasion or cataclysm had struck, we would expect hundreds of skeletons, not just dozens. This implies the city was vacated gradually, due to floods ruining agriculture, reduced river flow, and incursions by outside groups. Experts consider these the forces that prompted the populace to disperse across Sindh, eventually blending into local cultures over time. Echoes of the Indus still resonate in today's regional crafts. The beautiful Hala pottery, the Sindhi ajrak, even the classic axe form. Many customs, however, were discontinued for religious reasons, such as certain burial practices and dietary habits. At Mohenjo Daro, sometimes there was simple interment. Other times, The deceased were carefully adorned and buried with necessary items, reflecting a belief in life after death, similar to ancient Egypt. As for food, besides grains they consumed turtle and crocodile. Vessels have been found containing turtle shells. In recent conservation work, 2022-23, a bowl turned up holding about 55 kilograms of copper coins, dated to the Kushan period. Thank you so much for your affectionate comments. We'll see you in the next remarkable video.